So welcome everybody to September the 16th Q&A. I'm going to start with my screen share of my Twitter feed. And what I was saying before Zoom cut out was that these couple tweets have just been with respect to my recent episode with Brian Grimm, Dr. Brian Grimm. And luckily I'm in a position where I can actually give people a platform to help, essentially reach a wider audience than they otherwise would have. So I was really happy to do that for Brian, who is a family medicine or a GP doctor by training in California, but spends most of his clinical time working in higher acuity medicine. So more of a like critical care and intensive care setting, which is very cool. And what he's basically done is thought long and hard about disease and kind of done his own exploration into this whole circadian and quantum picture. And in many ways, like formulated his perspective that feels less kind of anchored to Dr. Jack Cruz in a good way. And what I mean by that is because Cruz is so unique and innovative and the original pioneer, I guess you could say, I think it's very easy for people who are joining the space to simply just um, follow in his footsteps, to say it politely, and maybe parrot what he's saying to say it more bluntly. But what Brian's done really well is kind of just synthesize things in his own way and presented that in a very, very unique way. So great interview with Brian. And it was a little bit, I think it was a little bit technical because he's just a very extremely smart guy, and he was just came out of the blocks, all guns firing. But I think we also managed to make it relatable. So yeah. And what are some tweets from this? Some cool excerpts. This guy, why would I get fat? I don't even know who he is. I've never spoken to him, but he's a guy who essentially transcribes the juiciest parts of these podcasts and essentially tweets at us and tags us, and I always retweet. And it's a cool way to um, project or to take an excerpt and help share it around. But this bit was cool, and Brian made the point that there's a part of the retina that is essentially so he's asked me the question is that what is the most focal point in the eye as far as the visual field is concerned. So it's this area called the fovea, and even more within the fovea is this foveola, which in Latin essentially means small fovea. And what he's basically saying is that this is essentially absent of cones and the short wavelength cones. So if you remember really briefly to your eye physiology, there's these different types of photoreceptors in the retina. So the visual photoreceptors are the rods and the cones. Rods are mediating nocturnal vision, nighttime vision. So they're essentially monochrome, and you'll know this by like when it's really dark, you can't distinguish color. And daytime vision is these cones, and they come in different flavors, as you mentioned, in the S, the M, and the L, and they're each sensitive to have their peaks at different wavelengths. So they help us to distinguish color. And obviously, you guys know that there's also non-visual photoreceptors, which are these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, and their photopigment is melanopsin, which is uniquely receptive or sensitive to blue light. But they don't have a image form. They're not image forming cells or photoreceptors like the rods and the cones are. So what Brian is saying in this little excerpt here is that the part of the fovea with the highest focus is not supposed to have a blue light source in there, because it's essentially missing the most sensitive cones for those wavelengths. So what he's saying is that it's actually, yes, you should be seeing blue, but the blue is always framed um against a background. So whether that's the ocean, whether that's the sky, it's not only blue. There's always like especially in the forest, there's green. There's an abundance of green light. So what he's saying is that the reason why we're seeing so much eye disease is because we're bombarding this foveolar area with essential isolated blue light, and it's essentially wreaking havoc with our visual system. And he's pointing to retinal detachments, macular degeneration, because we're generating all this stress and especially oxidative stress. Because remember, blue light is high energy light; it's right next to UV on the electromagnetic spectrum, so it actually photooxidizes. And what essentially needs is it needs darkness to help regenerate these cones. But what happens if no one is or people are exposing themselves to artificial light at night, is that say the sun goes down at 6 in your area and people have lights on until 10, is that they're subtracting 4 hours of cone regeneration. And I'm not even talking about melatonin. That's the circadian effect that's critical for the whole body health. But if we're just only focusing on the visual system, we're detracting, say, people have a normal Australian lifestyle, and they've got their downlights on in their kitchen for 2 hours, and then they're in their bedroom for an hour, and then they're on their iPad for another hour before bed, or their phone. So they're potentially subtracting 4 hours of darkness per night from from eye regeneration, from cone regeneration, that their body actually is expecting, because that's when the sun was going down, and potentially had ancestrally. That doesn't sound like a lot, but if that's 4 hours a day and it's every day, so four sevens are 28, that's 28 hours, a week times by 52, whatever that's 150 hours approximately a year, and then you just do it again and again and again, year after year, then you can see how that is going to essentially stack over time to help burn your eyes out, to cause retinal damage, cause all kinds of um like cataract and other kind of lens opacification. So yeah, bad news. That's why getting outside and seeing the sunrise is so beneficial. And that's why wearing blue light blockers to cut out the high energy visible blue light hazard is so important. That's why really embracing darkness at nighttime is critical. Circadian health, this duality of light and dark is first and foremost affecting eye health. It's the first and foremost thing to do to optimize eye health. Yes, the seed oils are bad, as Chris Kenobi would say, obviously, but think about the eye as primarily as an extension of the brain that is our almost first interface with light. So, of course, if we start playing up with our ancestral light environment, the eye is going to cop the brunt of that. Okay, this is an interesting tweet. Maybe you haven't followed it, but this is the closest tweet to something political that I'll post. But essentially, the UK, this artist Banksy, who is a stencil graffiti artist, posted this very iconic and iconoclastic stencil of a judge with a gavel, his hammer, essentially beating a protester. And it's a political statement, but it's art. It's artwork, and art is powerful because art eloquently tells a story that in a very visceral way, that potentially and quick way that the words can't really convey. A picture says 1,000 words. So the irony of this was that the UK government just essentially scrubbed it off and banned people from looking at it, which is proving the whole point. So yeah, free speech is important, and when artists who are non-violently making a statement. Yeah, you could argue this was vandalism, but Banksy is a world famous artist, and his other pieces essentially are celebrated. If he sprays one on a building, it gets, protected. But when it's inconvenient for the ruling class, then they cover it over. So yes, free speech is key. So what is this? So this is Nick Norowitz. Really long post, and if anyone's a Nick Norowitz fan, you kind of know what he's about. He's a smart guy, and he's using YouTube very well. He's like a tech digital native, and he's got well-produced YouTube videos. The long and the short of this post is that statin medications decrease GLP-1 levels, and glucagon-like peptide 1, who some of you may know, is an incretin hormone in the upper gastrointestinal tract. And when you signal that receptor with a injectable drug like Wegovy or Ozempic, it essentially turns off people's satiety, and that's why everyone, you're seeing people lose all this weight on Ozempic, is because they're pharmacologically triggering their anti hunger an anti-hunger signal. So, and these drugs are probably also affecting leptin and insulin centrally as well. So there's multiple facets to how they're working. But the interesting point is that the statins are actually lowering GLP-1, and the mechanism that this paper he's highlighting suggests is that it's doing it through changes in the microbiome. So, it's adding to this reason. I mean, why people who take statins end up getting diabetes more often, and that's extremely well established data. And these are just more reasons why we need to, and this isn't individual medical advice, but think very carefully about the risk versus benefit. And if people are doing absolutely nothing and they're rolling around with chronic metabolic disease, sure, the statin is probably better than is better than running around with uncontrolled if you're not doing anything about risk factors. But for people who are actively reversing the risk factors or the reasons why they were metabolically at risk or at risk of heart disease, then the question is that what is the risk versus benefit profile? So again, not individual medical advice, but more suggesting that we need to think really carefully, because there's all these off-target effects. So the cardiologist cares about diabetes to the extent to which it does affect blood glucose levels and therefore risk of heart disease, but they don't seem to, if that comes in conflict with statin medications or cholesterol lowering, they're happy to ignore it, because they've been so drilled into them that the lower the total cholesterol ApoB, the better, and the longer it is, the lower the better. So yeah, probably all I'll say on that. Okay, this post went it went viral, 56,000 views and 1,000 likes. People, this one resonated. So this guy Jonathan, he's a young guy, so he's only 19, and he's a pre-med student, and so he's not even yet started medical school, but he's smart, and he's looking to the light story. He's doing a bit of health education via YouTube and Instagram, and so it's good. He's doing a good job. And what he's done here is he's written in his notebook the two mechanisms by which melatonin can be stimulated to be produced in the body. So what we just were talking about melanopsin. So you you probably guys are aware of this canonical circadian pathway where the reception of blue light hits the eye, it goes through the retinal hypothalamic tract, it hits the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock in the hypothalamus. It goes then to the PVN, paraventricular nucleus. It then does this detour down the superior cervical ganglion and then back up to the pineal gland. And that signal turns off melatonin that gets put into your blood. So, and when there's blue light in the environment, no melatonin. It's a switch essentially. Whereas darkness and or absence of blue light. So when you've got your dark blockers on, then the body can make melatonin. Very so it's not that difficult to understand, but it's so fundamental to this whole story. And it's so important about why light affects health, because we've got a switch that turns on and off this critical repair and antioxidant hormone, depending on the reception of certain wavelengths of light. So, when I talk to patients and I'm trying to tell them about the value of wearing blue light blockers, I'll sometimes bring up that slide and try and explain it to them quickly, because it's the crux of a lot of the circadian side of this story. But what he's also written in his notebook is the daytime story about melatonin, and this is the melatonin that's essentially being made in the mitochondria. This is the Scott Zimmerman and Bob Fosbury side of the story, which is new. It's only been 4 or 5 years since they published that paper. And essentially what's happening is the near infrared is hitting complex 4. It's essentially triggering this cascade that involves nitric oxide, and then all the way down, and it activates this one of the melatonin enzymes, transferases that essentially makes melatonin. So what the point that Jonathan made in this diagram is that melatonin as both an expression of chemical expression of darkness and as a participant of sunlight exposure. And the goal, I guess, or the takeaway point, and I think, and I've really talked about it in many Q&As previously, is that your goal if you want to extend your health span as much as possible, is to maximize your own body's melatonin. And you do that by spending as much time outside gathering near infrared light, by being in greenery and sitting next to bushes and being in full spectrum light, and protecting your eyes and skin from artificial light as diligently as you can. And the better you do that, the more melatonin your body will make. What is melatonin doing? Well, I make the exact comment in my retweet, which went semi-viral. And I said here, melatonin is the ultimate antioxidant, lubricator of mitochondrial engines, and guardian of mitochondrial DNA. Modern living prevents melatonin production by a lack of daytime sunlight, which is rich in near infrared, and excess of light at night with the exposure to blue and green wavelengths, which turn off that circadian pineal melatonin circuit. So chronic diseases are an accelerated aging phenotype due to mitochondrial dysfunction, redox imbalance, and poor mitochondrial repair. So you can therefore frame chronic disease as a light problem if the issue is that the mitochondria aren't repairing. And why are they not repairing? Because they're melatonin deficient. Because the melatonin is helping reverse or fix all that oxidative damage that's occurring both during the day and during the night as a result of breathing oxygen, which is inherently an oxidative stress. And our goal is to manage that oxidative stress and minimize it to the degree that it's causing us damage. So I think this is one of the key points, I think, of my work. And I think a lot of what I'm communicating is coming back to try and explain how fundamental this process is to health, because every other person has Gabriel Lyons, and I'm not shitting on her by any means. She's got a good message, but protein medicine or muscle medicine, build muscle to extend longevity. Sure, important, but and then Peter Attia, the centenarian decathlon make sure that you're physically able to do all this exercise into your advanced stage. Sure, but all these other perspectives, and who else, like David Sinclair, take this cert, take resveratrol to kind of extend longevity, or these mTOR, manipulate mTOR like in this way to extend longevity. There's all these perspectives on longevity, but no one is talking about how this fundamental process of recognizing that we need to optimize our mitochondria if we're going to live the longest. How do we do that? Well, it comes down to the mitochondrial DNA and the mitochondrial oxidative stress, that redox balance. And how do you optimize that? Well, it's come back to the light story and go into the evolutionary biology of it. And wow, it turns out melatonin was around even before eukaryotic organisms were a thing. So that's why I keep pounding the pavement about light and health, is because I truly think it's at the foundation of health optimization, because of essentially these pathways. And again, not minimizing the role of the other things, but what I said in response to one of these comments is that you amplify the effect of all other mitochondrial stresses if you break the mitochondrial regeneration pathway, which is fundamentally a light-driven process. So I hope that makes sense.
Max?
Yeah.
When we disrupt that melatonin system after dark with blue light, I've heard that and known that for a very long time. But, like there is someone who might have to answer a phone call, and then there's someone who lies in bed with their phone for 3 hours watching movies. Is there degrees of disruption, or is it just one exposure, even if it's for half a minute, is as bad as watching a movie?
Okay, that's a great question. So it turns out that the signaling that you get from this melanopsin, it's they're kind of to some degree slowly responsive, and they will essentially respond to both the intensity of the light, blue light, and the duration of it. And in response to that signal, they will delay the onset of the production of melatonin. So yes, you can absolutely, that it's not going to be the same thing. If you have a short exposure and it's a low brightness, low lux, for a short amount of time, that is not going to affect it's not going to suppress or delay the onset of melatonin anywhere near as significantly as someone with the iPhone 20 centimeters from their face for 3 hours. So that's what the physiology of this melanopsin suggests. However, there's actually a very big variation individual between different people in their sensitivity to blue light and in their sensitivity to essentially melatonin suppression. Meaning, one person can suppress their melatonin needs 100 lux in order to get a 50% suppression, and other people it's like 10 lux. So interesting about what, I don't know what factors evolutionarily between different races or people, why that arose, or what were the factors that dictated that. But that is something that's present in the literature, which is some people are extremely sensitive and some people are not that sensitive. So hard to know about your own unless you bought, maybe like you could do an experiment on yourself. You could buy like 20 salivary melatonin kits, and with five sampling times, and then expose yourself to different lux intensities over the evening and on different days, and then measure the degree to which your melatonin level goes down. But you're not going to do that. That's a technical thing to do. But Only saying this to point out that there is variation, but yes, if you have to open the fridge and you haven't bought the red cellophane for the fridge light yet, then it's not going to be the same as sitting with that iPad so close to your face.
Can I also just add to that? I use I have a red light mat, just a small mat that I can use on my back or really anything. I have that as probably the last light that I see at night. And look, I don't know, I've observed just through personal experience, I sleep so much better when it's the last light or when I use it before bed. So it's doing something because at periods when I don't have it with me or I don't use it, I don't sleep really, really badly, but I notice the difference. So there is something going on about red light, the way it helps me sleep. It has a really, really impactful.
Interesting. Yeah, so red light isn't going to trigger this melanopsin receptor. However, the bright light potentially can drive a cortisol response. Even if it isn't going to suppress melatonin, it can potentially increase cortisol. So, that's behind the advice to minimize bright light, even if it's red after dark. However, I appreciate there seems to be an individual response. So, if you're feeling like that routine is really helping you and you feel great and very rested afterwards, then, by all means continue.
Hmm. Yeah, look, I don't know because it doesn't make sense to me to have bright light in my bedroom, and I don't necessarily do it as I'm trying to go to sleep. But yeah, I've really done it enough times now. It really does make the quality of my sleep is yeah really really improved.
Great. Interesting.
Mm.
Fantastic. Um, all right. This is another excerpt. Next tweet is another excerpt from this guy, Why Would I Get Fat? And essentially, the key takeaway was that Dr. Grimm essentially has reversed people's fatty liver, even if they're on a plant-based diet or omnivorous diet, no matter what diet, by simply uh, getting the circadian meal timing right. And, I sometimes say this to patients, that, the drinking a bottle of wine, a night, I'm like, okay, ideally you would not drink any wine. But if you have to drink the wine, at least try and finish drinking your wine before the sun sets. And the goal being, and I think I made this point in a previous, recent couple of weeks, is potentially it's not only the carbs or the alcohol in the wine that's contributing to the fatty liver. It's probably also the fact that it's being ingested at a really circadian inappropriate time. So when you put the food in the gastrointestinal system at a time when it's not optimized, it will cause disproportionate problems. And we know that now from that recent study that Roger Schwelt referenced with the shift workers, which is you can mitigate a massive amount of the metabolic harm of shift work by simply not eating overnight. And that was something that I learned myself after trial and erroring my way to optimal shift work because I had to do it, and finding that simply just drinking water overnight and not putting any food in my stomach, it made sure that I slept well and I essentially recovered well. And so the interesting point here, and I guess it's also maybe a good point for the practitioners listening, is getting clients or getting people to simply align their meals to a circadian clock, which is carbs in the middle day, closer to the middle day, and less carbs either end of that, and try and bring the final meal closer to the daytime, say 4 p.m., 3 p.m., and doing it earlier rather than later time restricted feed is potentially going to help in terms of weight loss, in terms of blood sugar control, um, in terms of fatty liver disease and all these kind of metabolic complications. So You become sensitive. I said this and I keep saying it. If you do this on yourself, you'll find that you'll even eat as early as eat something at 6 p.m. and being like, yeah, I really shouldn't have done that. I did the other day. I like finished eating at lunchtime, which is my normal time. By 2 p.m., I finished putting anything in my mouth. And then I'm like, oh, I got home and then something happened and um was not even it was a piece of like egg frittata was but even then I was like, damn, I really should have done that. I don't feel as good as having done that. But again, you kind of develop this sensitivity. The biggest the biggest issue with an early time restricted eating for people is family and meal times. And I really get it because for a lot of people, the social aspect of eating together when everyone's at home is something that they're unable to forego. Sure, I really get that. But if you can, and again, align the food with the circadian day, then potentially you get these benefits that are could be as much as not even changing what you're eating, but just the timing.
Max, can I make a comment about that? Like
Sure.
I found that it was he made an interesting comment about like carnivore or even keto and eating later at night and going that, you know, you might not be digesting food or like digesting the fats and the proteins till like, you know, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I found that was interesting based on our, you know, going to the regen retreat that I went on with you and you know eating at 2 o'clock and then not eating again. Like I slept so much better, and I you know I found that interesting. I found that really interesting that he made that comment.
Yeah, it is. It's a very well good point because what we notice is that, and you know that we know this from type 1 diabetics, they can have a protein load, so steak or burgers, and they still have to dose a bit of insulin. It's not like it's a free glycemic ride. So processing that protein is still demanding on the GI tract. And if you're eating at 10 p.m., but yeah, I'm carnivore, but I eating every night at 10 p.m., then yeah, you're potentially robbing your body of some time in nutritional ketosis. I
Mm.
think that's the key point. And if the goal here and the goal should be to um, ideally get into some degree of appropriate fasting response overnight so we can aid in autophagy and cleanup, cellular cleanup, then we want to not be asking our body to do digestion, as Dr. Grimm made that point that you've highlighted here. I think about that as well from in kind of multiple ways. And for men, prostate hypertrophy is something that's almost taken for granted. So I just recently finished this GP course, and one of these conventional GPs made the comment that things that grow, the nose, the prostate, the abdomen, and he made the comment as if it's inevitable that our patients' noses and abdomens and prostates will just grow with aging. Again, just presuming that's a foregone conclusion. But what we do know is that the nose grows because of visceral fat and facial visceral fat, and which is Dr. Amara's work, and that's actually reversible. We know that the abdomen growth does not have to happen, and again, this is all related to the light environment and our food environment, and obviously sedentary lifestyles as well playing its role. But this idea that the prostate also has to grow, well, we know that is under the effect of insulin. So, and what is putting insulin up should be the next question for anyone trying to think reverse engineer this process. And the answer is yes, it's carbs and carb eating, but it's also blue light and artificial light, and it's also potentially eating late at night. And the fact that you're putting the insulin level up for from the moment that person drinks a coffee with milk or cream and their sugar, at 6, 7 a.m. all the way until their evening meal is digested around 12. So that person has got very little amount of time that their insulin levels are able to fall, which is a continuation of Marie, your point and Dr. Brian Grimm's point. And we weren't adapted to having these glucose and insulin high for more than half of the 24-hour cycle. That's not how things should have gone. And fixing this, which is this early time restricted eating the food an hour after being outside in bright morning light, finishing our meals earlier in the afternoon, and then having this fasting period. It's like the yin yang duality of light dark, but for food intake. And I really think that this is a strong lifestyle habit that everyone can cultivate for optimal metabolic health and longevity, which is really respecting our body's needs for time with no food in our GI tract, and potentially even chucking in something like a 48-hour fast every month. For most people is likely to be beneficial. But it was great, it's great to experience that. And again, like the retreats, it's an awesome opportunity to help show everyone and show you guys that, which is how does it feel to really pull that meal time earlier, but still feel satisfied because you've eaten sufficient amount of protein, and see how that affects sleep and other factors. So yeah, this is an interesting tweet, which so this, I don't even know who this guy is. He follows me, but this is an interesting tweet. So he said, as soon as I realized no one was coming to save me from a debilitating Moderna injury, subscribed to everything Jack Cruz said, read The Body Electric, sold the house in the city in Florida, bought a farm, changed all the bulbs, removed the TVs and Bluetooth speakers, built a dock from which I worship the sun, hardwired the router, told the children to get jobs and move out or shut up about flipping the breaker switch to the power at 11 p.m. Something is healing my body and so I'm going to keep doing it. So my point on that was the crux of Cruz's work is that your environment and lifestyle habits are the most important determinant of your health. The sicker you are, the more radical steps need to be taken to reverse course. So again, I see this all the time in clinical medicine is, I don't tell anyone to do it. Here are the options. If you care enough because you're in enough discomfort about your current health status, you'll do something about it. If not, people won't, but that's fine. So maybe the final tweet, and we've talked a lot about Twitter and not a lot of questions, but we could get to them. Young King Mido, he's just on fire lately. He's unlocking another level of good stuff. So I respect his work. But he's likening blue light to a glucose IV drip. I really like that. So read his stuff if you're interested. But I've summarized it here, which is this idea that unopposed blue light is giving us a constant hyperglycemic, hyperinsulinemic stimulus. It's constantly pushing up glucose, pushing up insulin. The opposite happens when you get out in full spectrum sunlight. You get red, you get the near infrared. It spins the ATPase. It consumes glucose, and we know that because your oxygen consumption production goes up. And yeah, that's the kind of opposing effects of different light spectrums. And this is why being indoors under artificial light all day leads to the type of overweight and obesity and leptin resistance that people can't. They think that oh, nothing works, nothing's working. It's like, okay, let's try fixing your environment at the root cause. Cool. All right. Now we'll jump to the questions. Hudson. So Hudson's just joined. Welcome, mate. Do you have any guidance or suggestions for a young person, 26, living in a rapidly and technologically AI advancing world that is wanting to help people heal naturally and reverse chronic lifestyle influence induced conditions, what do you think would be the most impactful degree and qualifications to pursue in order to best help the world's sick and suboptimal population while doing the least amount of harm? Open to any and all suggestions. Okay, great question. The pace of change that is currently happening, especially with AI, is absolutely incredible. It's going so quickly, and the quality of output that these large language models like ChatGPT is putting out is incredible. It isn't at this stage able to replace a clinical encounter, and maybe it won't for a while, even as the technology continues to improve, because there's some fundamental problems like medical liability that can't be solved at this point of time. They probably will, but not yet. So the degree, or I think the position to have the most impact, I think, is probably still a consultant MD, but that process to get there is so arduous, is so long, and it's a 15-year journey. The fact that they have the most sway is because they've put so much proof of work into getting to where they are. Look at me. I mean, it's been 6 or 7, 7 years since I graduated medical school, and I'm only now within another 6, 7 months going to be getting my fellowship in family medicine, and it's taken a very long time. So what I think that for you, there's lots of options. I mean, some people go down, I think you mentioned in your post, like the idea of clinical nutrition. That's potentially a good idea. Doing naturopathy, yeah, I mean, also potentially a good idea. The medicine road, if you wanted to take it, I'm sure you could also do that as well. But you just have to be prepared to essentially be in for the very long haul, and also potentially make sacrifices in terms of not being able to practice, in terms of advising patients for a very long time. But I think at the end of that, the sway or the influence would be most. So there's no right answer. Obviously, the medicine journey starts even well before even getting into medical school, in terms of exam preparation, all this kind of thing. But and there's also certain other compromises that you have to make to kind of get through their university bureaucratic structures. But it is, I think, that we're still going to need MDs, as far as I can see, unless AI completely transforms the world into something unrecognizable, which is possible. But I guess we can only plan for what we can foresee, in which case, if you wanted to start treating patients as soon as possible, then you may want to do one of those other degrees. And let me make the point that I don't think you need an MD to talk about circadian and quantum biology and the applied circadian quantum biology at all. So this isn't the domain of doctors. It's everyone's business, and every practitioner should be talking to their patients about the light dark cycle and how that's affecting their health. So whatever I think you choose, I think you're going to be in a position to be giving this lifestyle advice, because the more who talk about it, the more quicker things can change. So, okay, Marie, you've asked, great talk with Dr. Brian Grimm. Can you explain a couple points about the blood panels you spoke about at the 15-minute mark? Bilirubin and biliverdin. Is this measured? This was in the context of green light. MCV, mean cell volume, with respect to high MCVs. and how to make a change in blood markers. Mine's been high for 20 years, and doctors say I'm lacking B vitamins, and treating that doesn't seem to change it. Also, albumin, blood, urine, nitrate, creatinine markers, what do they mean for mitochondria? And thoughts on taking creatine, why and when would you do it? So what we can quickly talk about first is the biliverdin. I'm going to screen share again because I'm going to reference the Substack article that he summarized his thoughts on. So let me go back and screen share. So this is Dr. Grimm's Substack. So what he said is your body's, I'll read it out really quickly. Your body's forgotten green molecule that might be your built-in infrared switch. What if your body had a pigment that functioned like a solar panel, flat, green, designed to absorb near infrared light and silently tune your metabolism? It exists. It's called biliverdin. It's the older, more mysterious sibling of bilirubin, the molecule that every doctor knows from treating jaundiced babies. But unlike bilirubin, which absorbs blue light and turns yellow in labs and skin, biliverdin is planar and absorbs red and infrared range. New research just showed that if you let it accumulate, then shine near-infrared light on it, you get something wild, a 60% drop in blood sugar. No insulin, no drug, just a pigment and a wavelength. Let's break down what it means. Biliverdin is normally converted rapidly to bilirubin via the enzyme biliverdin reductase. And what that's in a process of the breakdown of red blood cells. So this is, if you imagine heme breakdown, so heme is one part of hemoglobin. The heme part binds iron and helps the body transfer oxygen that's bound to iron centers in hemoglobin. So when you need to metabolize and break down these red blood cells, biliverdin is one of these breakdown products. Researchers blocked this conversion, which caused biliverdin to accumulate in the tissues, including the brain. With this accumulation in place, they exposed the animals to near-infrared light. They saw a dramatic drop in blood glucose attributed to light-activated insulin gene expression. So the implication is that biliverdin might be an endogenous light antenna that lets cells see near-infrared and convert that signal into metabolic output. So what does that mean? Biliverdin, so biliverdin might enhance essentially the sensing of near-infrared light very, very locally, and the drop in glucose may reflect a smoother mitochondrial throughput. So he's suggesting or speculating that that potentially if your cells can't capture red and near-infrared, you might be missing this ability to help lower your blood glucose levels. So and potentially that effect is just really, really local. So that's kind of what he was saying about biliverdin. It's just an I guess, Marie, it's an insight into how this story about light goes deeply, and it's not only the mechanism of this ATPase spinning that couldn't reduce blood glucose levels, but there could be and I'm sure there are all these other interesting mechanisms that science is just coming around to understanding and appreciating. So as for the other parts of your question, so mean cell volume refers to the size of the red blood cell. And this is reported because clinically we get information as doctors about different disease states by looking at the size of the red blood cell. And as Dr. Grimm mentions in the podcast, the traditional factors that increase the mean cell volume are B12 and folate deficiencies and alcohol consumption and certain drugs, particularly anti-convulsant drugs like probably phenytoin and Keppra and certain drugs like that. So if the kind of in the pathway or the flow chart for investigating a high MCV, and if it's accompanied by anemia, then typically that's because of a deficiency in one of those key B12 or folate. That's called a macrocytic anemia, and essentially treating that or repleting those micronutrients leads to an increase in the hemoglobin and a normalization of the red cell volume. But what can also increase the size of the red blood cell is alcohol, and alcohol can do that even if there's no anemia. So that's kind of what Grimm was alluding to as the traditional interpretation of the MCV, but his kind of field biology analysis was that it's a sign that in terms of this, along this idea of growth is energy lost into the system, like then potentially it's a sign that the body is trying to compensate for energetic compromise or energetic loss. So yeah, it's a tough one. I've had patients who've had unsolved and high MCVs for a very long time. I always tell them to completely avoid alcohol for 4 or 6 weeks, retest. If their B12 levels are normal, folate's normal, homocysteine is normal, because that's a good, if you really want to assess tissue level deficiency of those nutrients, then you can measure a serum MMA, methyl malonic acid, can't remember what, MMA, and homocysteine. And if these are essentially in the enzymatic pathway of methylation, and if they're high, if the homocysteine is high, then it implies that you're deficient. So if that's all normal, then we sometimes have to look into supplements. We have to obviously look into alcohol to kind of see where that if those are contributing factors. So as for the other those other insights into the blood markers, he didn't explain them. I kind of was, if you noticed, I was kind of poking him in the interview to explain a bit more, but he didn't really. But he was saying that he analyzes or looks at certain, like the albumin creatinine ratio to give insight. But yeah, he didn't explain enough for me to kind of give you anything more than what he said in that interview. But I'll be in contact with him, so I'll see what I can get out of him. Cool.
The creatine, so it seems that there's a lot of people talking about creatine, that it's useful for longevity, that it's not only helping muscle strength, but it's also helping to build brain function. Your thoughts on it?
Yeah, to me, it's like, these different supplements go through a hype cycle. There's all these hype cycles of different things that people are obsessed with. At the end of the day, it's a hyper concentration of a highly refined hyper concentration of one nutrient. And sure, there could be some benefit in people who are frankly deficient because their diet is the standard American diet. But I really am skeptical that it's going to be superior than simply a really nutrient dense whole foods diet over a period of over the long term. And I think there's probably some unknown compromise that we're not sure of yet, that mega dosing creatinine is going to be responsible for. And these accounts like Rhonda Patrick, I mean, Cruz's criticism of Rhonda Patrick are ones that I kind of mirror in many ways. Like, yeah, I think this is someone who her accounts, and accounts like hers are kind of in many ways responsible for these kind of like supplement hype cycles, and other people who frankly just make money off selling creatinine, so creatine. So yeah, I'm sure. I mean, there's evidence for benefit, but what are we trading off in another area that we haven't measured? So that's my take on it. Eat the beef. Eat the beef. Eat the have yeah. Yeah. And then someone will say, "Oh, you have to eat too much beef to get that amount." But I mean, yeah, happy to be
Eat,
proven wrong,
eat
but
the
it just
beef
doesn't.
in the sun.
Yeah, it doesn't fit with me that this would be a long-term sustainable. There's no free lunch. There's no free lunch, and no one had access to purified 30 grams a day of powdered creatine in our ancestral past. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Tara, your question. So explain this idea of cell polarity. If altered cell polarity is one of the foundational causes of aberrant cell proliferation, and evidence suggests good circadian health is associated with lowering of cancer risk, how might a light environment be affecting this process? Or is it a case of broken cell polarity just the distant end result of many upstream processes that are more directly tied to a light diet? Okay, so this is an interesting question, and this goes into essentially the bioelectricity field, or the idea of cellular bioelectricity. And there's a guy called Michael Schifre who did some extremely interesting talks for the Guy Foundation. They're actually on the Guy Foundation YouTube if you want to watch them. And he is essentially looking at like charge and how the loss of negative charge of the cell kind of predicts its behavior. And the more that the cell loses charge, the more kind of proliferative behavior it shows. So both stem cells, which are obviously designed to proliferate a lot, and cancer cells are very they essentially don't carry the negative charge that more stable cell lines and in organs, different organs, display. So the idea potentially is that if the cell is losing charge and potentially from a lack of proper bioelectric signaling, then it could potentially contribute to a loss of charge, which is then going to help it display this mobile, I guess, behavior that's like, okay, we've got to metastasize, we've got to spread, we've got to colonize. But I guess the next facet of this is these cells are not only bioelectric, but there's a photobioelectric effect. And what Cruz would say is that the dependence is on light, which is essentially a correct biophoton emissions from the surrounding cells. So, and potentially also from solar light, sufficient ultraviolet light that the cells don't lose their negative charge. They don't start developing this mobile proliferative state and then start looking for other things like cancer metastases do. So I guess to answer your question, it's just one of the facets by which this light story and grounding as well is potentially helping keep ourselves in this like coherent bioelectric field that doesn't make them want to detach from their neighbors and replicate. And I don't know if I ended up including it in my talk. I think I did at Regenerate last year about cancer and sunlight. And what it turns out is that vitamin D is critical for maintaining the cellular scaffolding that the cells rely on. And when that vitamin D signaling drops or is absent for long periods of time, the cadherins or the scaffolds that keep them all in place becomes weaker, the cell-cell junctions, and that is one of the hallmarks of of cancer. I mean, there's so many hallmarks, but that's kind of one of them. So, keeping a strong, obviously keeping a robust vitamin D level is one of the ways that you help ensure that the cells stay in place and stay in their appropriate place. And obviously another way is maintaining an aligned circadian rhythm, because the cell checkpoints and the cell replication is also dependent on appropriate circadian signals. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's I sort of kept running into it in some of Dr. Grimm's work, and it kind of it's where my comprehension kind of stalled. So yeah, thank you.
No worries. Let me just quickly find Michael Schiffer, Guy Foundation. He's unfortunately his talk is not too it's quite complex as well. But if you want to have an attempt, then I'll post it on the just from now on there for you to have a look at. Great. Does anyone have any questions before we sign off? Cool. Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks for joining live, and I hope you all have a great week. And again, anyone listening, we are going full speed ahead with our end of November retreat. We've still got some places available if you'd like to join me for that. And yeah, the end of the year is approaching quite quickly. I'm still kind of in the middle of study for my final exam that I have got done to have to do, but I've got 2 more podcasts already recorded that I'll drip out maybe in the next one in the next week, which is about heart disease and nutrients. We talk a bit about homocysteine and vitamin B12 actually. So yeah, so stay tuned for that, and yeah, we'll see you all next week.
Hey, Max, are you thinking about going to Costa Rica next year for the retreat?
That's a very good question. At this stage, no. We don't. If we do, we will like let you know in with a lot of time in advance. It was a bit short of timing this time, and I know these things take a lot of planning, so we will try and tell you 9 months in advance. But I think my plan for next year is just to focus here in Australia and to hopefully be able to offer something in person at some stage up here on the Northern Rivers for clinical care and visits, and again in this area for retreats. So yeah, that's the preliminary plan at the moment.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool. All right.
Thanks.
Great.
Thanks.
Have
Good
a
night.
great week. See ya. Good night.
Thanks, Max.
Yeah, bye.